Hello everybody, I'm just going to dive straight in. Let's have a look at question 1. All the questions that we're going to be looking at today, all the videos are done separately. You don't have to look at every question. You can pick and choose the questions that you fancy. Okay, so let's get straight to it. We're going to have, first of all, you start by reading the question and then you look at the number of marks that are available. Okay, so we have a group of students investigated populations in a food chain in a garden. So food chain tells me a little bit about what we're looking at. We know the keyword populations and what that means. The table shows the estimates of the number and biomass of some of the organisms the student found. So we've got a table that we've got to refer to. It's estimates, so they're not exact numbers. We've got number and biomass of some of the organisms the student found. So I'm going to take a few moments to look at the table. We've got organism, hedgehog, slug, lettuce. Okay, I can tell if that was a food chain, that's the order it would be in. So our lettuce would be at the bottom, slug, hedgehog. Okay, we start with our producer, slug, hedgehog. So we'll have a look at the number that are in the garden. We've got 1 hedgehog, 600 slugs and 60 lettuces. Our mean mass of each one in grams, so we've got our hedgehogs are at 200 grams, the slugs are at 2 grams and the lettuce is at 100 grams. So there we've got biomass of population. We can see that that's 200 grams, the slugs 1200, and we can see that there's a blank in the table there. Now we're going to come back to that because obviously we're going to have to do something there. So let's have a look at the first question. Calculate. Okay, now I'm never going to walk into an exam in science without 2 very fundamental pieces of equipment. You will always make sure that you have a ruler and a calculator to use, because under the stress of an exam you don't want to be relying on mental maths. If you can use a calculator, do it nice and easy. So calculate the biomass of the lettuce population. So I'm going to underline lettuce over here because that's going to draw my attention to the line that I'm looking at, and I've got to calculate that. I've got to fill in this blank. So show clearly how you work out your answer. So hopefully you'll have worked out what you've got to do, but I've got to take the number of lettuces that are in the garden, which is 60. I'm going to make sure I'm writing that down right. And the mean mass of each one in grams, which is 100. And I'm going to have to multiply them together because that's going to give me the total biomass of the population of lettuces in grams. Now obviously I'm aware that you can probably do this in your heads. I'm going to take away any kind of confusion and I'm going to make sure I do it on my calculator because I want to make sure that I'm not going to make any mistakes. Right, after writing that in, I'm going to double check that I've got the right numbers, 60, 100, so that the calculation's correct. Now, does it ask me to put it in the table? No, then it's absolutely fine on this line. Do I need to round it to any significant figures? No. Okay, so I've got 1 mark for the calculation, 1 mark for the answer, for 2 marks. So I feel like we're doing all right there. We can probably proceed. So part 2, use your answer to part A, number 1, to complete the pyramid of biomass. Okay, so I know that's going to be one of those things. Okay, the rules are it's got to be labelled and it's got to be symmetrical. Show the biomass of the lettuce population in the garden. Okay, I've got biomass of population in grams. The whole thing's worth 2 marks. Now, if I look, I've got to make sure I've got the same amount either side. It's got to be symmetrical. So take 6,000 and I'm going to divide it by 2. So I'm going to end up with 3,000 on either side of this line. And here's where having my ruler is going to help. So I'm going to draw a line up. I can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boxes. So I'm going to make sure when I draw this, I'm taking it up to 5 boxes. I'm going to go out as far as here as well. Do my 5 boxes. And then I'm going to draw a nice neat straight line joining up those 2 marks. Okay, I'll also take my time and I'm going to label it. I've got to add lettuce, so I'm going to just make sure I get that right, and I'm going to label it lettuce. Move on to the last question. The energy in the hedgehog population is much less than the energy in the slug population. The energy in the hedgehog population, there is, if we look at total mass, total biomass, that's 200, is much less than the energy in the slug. Well, let's look. Yeah, okay, so we've got some numbers here to help us. Explain why. Why have I got less energy in my hedgehogs than in my slugs? Okay, so here's where I've got to start tying in some of the information that I know. Now, there's less energy in the hedgehogs because the hedgehogs are undergoing respiration. The hedgehogs have maybe not eaten all the slugs. They're also producing waste like feces and urine. Perhaps the hedgehogs has had to move around to find the slugs. And the hedgehog will have been keeping itself warm as well. So there's lots of answers that we could put in here. How many are we looking for? We're looking for 3. So I'm going to number them 1, 2, 3 to make sure that I know I'm doing 3 points. And you can do bullet points. In a science paper, you're allowed to do bullet points. So the first one I'm going to do is the hedgehog will be undergoing respiration. That's why it has less of its energy. Okay. The hedgehog will also be producing feces, so undigested meal. So the hedgehog will produce feces from undigested material. So what you're essentially saying is some of what it eats isn't going to go in. So the hedgehog will produce feces from undigested material. Some of that waste will be urine. Now you have to be careful there because some mark schemes have urine and feces as the same answer because they're both waste products. So it's up to you whether you want to put urine down as your third point or not. I wouldn't risk it. I would try and think of something else. I'm also going to put down that the hedgehog will be moving around. And those are 3 reasons why the hedgehog population is going to have much less energy than the slugs. They've got to be able to do all those processes. So I'm going to take a moment just to go back through this. Have we answered all the questions? Yes. That's great. And now, where are common mistakes made in exam answers? This is only going to be a few minutes longer. So common mistakes that were made are people not putting the right values in, or when they were doing the calculation accidentally missing off a 0. So always double check when you're writing that you're writing down what the answer is. You can always double check your answers as well, because if you've done your calculation right, if you multiply those two together you must get the same answer. So 600 times 2 would be 1200. That gives you the correct calculation. 1 times 200 gives you 200. So we know that's the correct calculation that we've got to do. You've got to multiply those numbers together to get that one. Then we must have done it. So you can go through and look at it logically, even if you're not sure of the maths. Looking at part 2, where were common mistakes made in this kind of thing? Well, sometimes students just don't even attempt this kind because you don't see a line to write an answer on. So you've got to look carefully at your exam paper. Sometimes it's even a blank, and you might see that in some of the other questions that we're going to have a look at. Most students are able at writing and doing the correct bar, but you know, some people, they extended it to 600 on either side, or you know, they got the calculation wrong and they haven't got it symmetrical. So they try to extend it to 6,000 either side of the bottom, which obviously isn't going to work because 1, the scale doesn't go that far, and 2, 6,000 has to be the total, 3,000 on each side. If you got that calculation wrong, so say you wrote 4,000 instead of 6,000 and did 2,000 on either side for this, you'd get this mark correct, because this part depends upon your answer here. So if you made a mistake here, you're not going to be penalised twice. What they're going to do is they're going to give you the correct mark based on what you've answered here. So that is obviously the ideal way of doing it. And this question, when it was set in an exam, was found to be rather weakly answered. And the reason it was weakly answered is because although students did put like movement and heat and feces in, and if they'd left it at that, they would have got all the marks. Unfortunately, a lot of students go on to say that it's the slugs that are doing these things, and it's not, it's the hedgehogs. In hunting for the slugs, the hedgehog is doing the moving, so it's getting less energy. Okay, so you have to be careful, pay attention to what the question's asking. The reason the hedgehog has less is because the hedgehog's moving around, not because the slug is moving around. That wouldn't mean that the hedgehog gets less. Okay, so be careful how you're answering these kinds of questions. Obviously we're going to have a look elsewhere at some other examples, and I hope you're finding this helpful.